The blazing Texas sun beat down on Rebecca Russell's back as she hurried along the dusty main street of Llano, clutching her market basket close to her chest. Whispers followed her like rattlesnake hisses, faint but deadly, poisoning the very air she breathed. 3 months in this town, and still the sidewalks cleared when she approached, conversations halting mid-sentence, only to resume in hushed, judgmental tones once she passed. "There she goes, the widow woman," someone muttered. "The one who killed her husband." Rebecca kept her eyes forward, chin high despite the burning in her throat. She hadn't killed anyone, but in Llano, Texas in 1878, the truth mattered less than what people chose to believe. The town's general store loomed ahead, its weathered facade both a necessity and a weekly torment. Mr. Pratt, the owner, never failed to make her transaction as uncomfortable as possible, serving her last regardless of her place in line, counting her coins twice as if expecting her to cheat him, and writing her purchases in his ledger with exaggerated strokes as though documenting evidence of some crime. Today, the store appeared mercifully empty as Rebecca approached. Perhaps she could complete her shopping without enduring the usual humiliations. She smoothed her simple gray dress, a far cry from the finer garments she'd once worn, and stepped inside. The bell above the door announced her entrance, and Mr. Pratt's thin face appeared from behind a stack of newly arrived dry goods. His expression soured immediately. "Mrs. Russell," he acknowledged with a curt nod. "Good afternoon, Mr. Pratt. I need only a few things today." She moved efficiently through the store, selecting flour, coffee, sugar, and a small tin of tea, her one luxury. At the counter, she arranged her items carefully, counting the coins from her dwindling savings. The door's bell jangled again, and the atmosphere in the store shifted immediately. Rebecca sensed the change before she turned to see who had entered. Heavy boots crossed the wooden floor, spurs jingling softly with each step. "Afternoon, Mr. Pratt," called a deep voice she didn't recognize. "Mr. Quinn, welcome back to Llano. How was your business in Austin?" Rebecca kept her eyes down, arranging her coins into neat stacks as Mr. Pratt abandoned her to greet the newcomer. "Productive," the man answered. "The cattle drive begins next week. I'll need supplies for my men." Of course. I'll help you immediately." Rebecca cleared her throat softly. "Mr. Pratt, I believe I was in the middle of my transaction." The storekeeper's face reddened. "You'll have to wait, Mrs. Russell. Mr. Quinn's business is more important." "I don't mind waiting my turn," the stranger said, his tone casual but firm. "The lady was here first." Rebecca finally looked up, meeting the gaze of a tall man with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. His dark hair was slightly too long, curling at the collar of his cotton shirt, and a neatly trimmed beard shadowed his jaw. He tipped his hat to her with a slight smile. Mr. Pratt sputtered. "This isn't just any lady, Mr. Quinn. This is Mrs. Russell, Rebecca Russell." The emphasis placed on her name was unmistakable, laden with innuendo and warning. Rebecca felt her cheeks flush with shame and anger. "Is that so?" The stranger said mildly. "Well, Mrs. Russell's money spends the same as mine, I imagine." Mr. Pratt lowered his voice to a conspiratorial whisper that was perfectly audible throughout the small store. "She was married before to a wealthy businessman from back east. He died under questionable circumstances. They say she poisoned him for his fortune but couldn't prove it. Ran here to escape the scandal." Rebecca's knuckles whitened around her basket handle. "That is entirely untrue, Mr. Pratt, as I have told you repeatedly." The stranger, Mr. Quinn, studied her with interest rather than judgment. "I believe the lady was making a purchase," he said firmly. "I'll browse while you finish her transaction." Mr. Pratt reluctantly returned to the counter, tallying Rebecca's items with obvious displeasure. He wrote each purchase in his ledger with aggressive strokes of his pencil, then spun the book around for her to sign. Rebecca's eyes caught on the previous entry's other customers' names alongside their purchases. Beside many of them, in Mr. Pratt's angular handwriting, were notes. Good Christian woman next to Mrs. Johnson's name, paid in full, honest man beside Mr. Miller's. Next to her own previous entries, he'd written former Mrs. Blackwell and suspicious character. Her hand trembled as she reached for the pencil. "Allow me," said Mr. Quinn, suddenly at her elbow. Before Rebecca could react, he took the pencil from Mr. Pratt's hand and in bold strokes wrote a single word next to her name: "Forgiven." He returned the pencil and smiled at her, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "We're all sinners in the eyes of the Lord, aren't we, Mr. Pratt? Lucky for us, forgiveness is always available." Mr. Pratt's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for water. Rebecca stared at the stranger, unable to formulate a response to this unexpected intervention. "Thomas Quinn," he said, extending his hand to her. "I've just bought the old Hamilton ranch outside of town." Rebecca hesitantly placed her fingers in his calloused palm. "Rebecca Russell." "Pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Russell." He released her hand and nodded toward her purchases. "May I help you carry those home?" "That's not necessary," she replied automatically, still stunned by his actions. "Perhaps not necessary, but I'd consider it a kindness if you'd allow me to accompany you. I'm new in town and could use some honest conversation." Something in his emphasis on the word honest made her study him more carefully. His expression revealed nothing but polite interest, yet Rebecca sensed depths beneath his easy manner. "Very well, Mr. Quinn." He gathered her parcels despite Mr. Pratt's disapproving frown and followed her outside into the harsh Texas sunlight. "You shouldn't have done that," Rebecca said once they were beyond the store's earshot. "Now they'll talk about you too." Thomas Quinn laughed, the sound unexpectedly warm in the dusty street. "Mrs. Russell, people have been talking about me my entire life. One more rumor won't make much difference. You don't understand how this town works." "I understand people," he replied simply. "And I've never put much stock in gossip. Now, which way to your home?" Rebecca hesitated, then pointed toward the small house at the edge of town she'd rented with the last of her funds. "It's not far." They walked in silence for several moments, Rebecca acutely aware of the curious glances from townspeople witnessing her in male company for the first time since her arrival in Llano. "You should know," she finally said, "that what Mr. Pratt implied isn't true. I didn't harm my husband." Thomas adjusted the packages in his arms. "I didn't think you had. You don't even know me. I'm a fair judge of character, Mrs. Russell. I've had to be in my line of work." "And what work is that exactly?" "I raise cattle, train horses when the need arises." "I fought for the Confederacy, though I take no pride in that anymore. After the war, I drove cattle up to Kansas, then managed to save enough to buy my own spread." He glanced at her. "Now I've told you my history. Perhaps you'd feel comfortable sharing yours." They'd reached the white picket fence surrounding her modest home. Rebecca stopped, considering his request. No one in Llano had asked for her story, they'd simply decided they already knew it. "Would you care for some coffee, Mr. Quinn? My story isn't a short one." He smiled, and something in Rebecca's chest loosened slightly. "I'd be honored, Mrs. Russell." Inside, Rebecca's little house was simply but carefully furnished with the few pieces she'd managed to bring from her previous life. Thomas set her purchases on the kitchen table and removed his hat, revealing thick dark hair that curled slightly at his temples. As she prepared coffee, Rebecca found herself studying him surreptitiously. He stood with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin, examining the single shelf of books she'd kept from her former library. "You appreciate literature," he observed. "My father was a schoolteacher in Virginia. He believed education was important for everyone, including daughters." She poured coffee into 2 cups and gestured toward her small sitting area. "Please, make yourself comfortable." Thomas sat in the wooden rocking chair while Rebecca perched on the edge of the settee across from him. For a moment, they sipped their coffee in silence. "I was married to Edward Blackwell for 6 years," she began abruptly. "He was 20 years my senior, a successful merchant in Richmond. After my parents died of influenza in '69, I had few options. Edward had been my father's friend, and he offered marriage as a solution to my predicament." "Was it a good match?" Thomas asked. Rebecca stared into her coffee cup. "He was kind enough. Our arrangement was more practical than romantic. Edward wanted a hostess for his social gatherings and someone to manage his household. I wanted security." She paused. "We were comfortable together, but there was little passion between us. That's not uncommon in marriages of convenience." "No, it isn't." Rebecca set her cup down carefully. "Last year, Edward became ill. It began with headaches, then tremors in his hands. The doctors were baffled. He grew steadily worse over several months with periods of confusion and severe pain." Her voice faltered. "Before he died, he had a moment of clarity. He told me he believed he was being poisoned by business rivals who wanted his shipping contracts." Thomas leaned forward. "And were there suspects?" "Several. Edward had enemies, men he'd outmaneuvered in business dealings. But after his death, rumors began that I was responsible. His cousin Marcus particularly encouraged the speculation. He stood to inherit if I were found guilty." "Were you formally accused?" Rebecca's laugh held no humor. "No formal charges were ever brought. They had no evidence because I'd done nothing wrong. But in society, accusations alone are enough to ruin a woman. After Edward's funeral, I found my former friend's doors closed to me. Notes were delivered requesting I decline invitations to social events. Even my household staff began to look at me differently." "So you came to Texas." "I sold what I could, settled Edward's affairs, and left Virginia with what remained of my inheritance, which wasn't much after Marcus contested the will. I chose Llano because it was far from Richmond, and I'd heard it was a growing town where I might find work as a seamstress or perhaps a teacher." "But the rumors followed you somehow." Rebecca nodded. "Marcus has a cousin who settled in Austin. When I applied for the teaching position here, suddenly the school board received an anonymous letter detailing my scandalous past. The position went to someone else, and I've been surviving on my dwindling savings and occasional sewing work ever since." Thomas was quiet for a moment, considering her story. "Have you had Edward's body examined? If he was poisoned, there might be evidence." "The cousin arranged for cremation immediately after the funeral, against Edward's wishes for burial. That only fueled the suspicions against me." "Convenient for the cousin," Thomas observed. "Very." He set his empty cup aside. "Mrs. Russell, I believe your husband was correct about being poisoned but incorrect about the culprit. His cousin sounds like the guilty party." "I've considered that possibility," Rebecca admitted, "but I have no way to prove it and no resources to pursue the matter. Perhaps that will change." Thomas rose and retrieved his hat. "Thank you for your honesty and the coffee, Mrs. Russell. I have some business to attend to, but I wonder if you might allow me to call on you again." Rebecca felt a flutter of something she hadn't experienced in years, not quite hope, but perhaps its distant cousin. "I would welcome the company, Mr. Quinn, though I should warn you that associating with me may not help your standing in Llano." His smile returned, warming his stormy eyes. "I've never been much concerned with standing, Mrs. Russell, only with justice and truth." He placed his hat on his head and moved toward the door. "And please call me Thomas." "Then you must call me Rebecca." At the door, he turned back. "Rebecca, I'm hosting a small gathering at my ranch this Saturday evening, just a few neighbors and some of my men. I'd be honored if you'd attend." Her instinct was to refuse, to protect herself from the inevitable cold shoulders and whispered comments. But something in Thomas Quinn's steady gaze made her reconsider. "I'll come," she heard herself say. "Thank you for the invitation." His smile broadened. "I'll send a wagon for you at 6. With a tip of his hat, he was gone, leaving Rebecca staring after him, wondering what had possessed her to accept. The days leading to Saturday passed in a flurry of anxiety and preparation for Rebecca. She alternated between anticipation and dread, repeatedly considering sending a note to decline Thomas's invitation. Yet each time she resolved to do so, she remembered the bold letters he had written in Mr. Pratt's ledger. Forgiven. It was a word she'd longed to hear, to feel, since Edward's death had turned her from respectable widow to suspected murderess. The fact that it had come from a stranger made it both more meaningful and more confusing. On Saturday afternoon, Rebecca found herself examining her limited wardrobe with critical eyes. Most of her finer dresses had been sold to fund her journey west, and what remained were practical garments in somber colors suitable for a woman in reduced circumstances. At the back of her wardrobe, protected by tissue paper, lay the one fine dress she hadn't been able to part with, a gown of deep blue silk, with delicate embroidery at the bodice and sleeves. Edward had commissioned it for her to wear to the governor's ball in Richmond, their last social engagement before his illness began. Rebecca hesitated, her fingers tracing the fine material. Would wearing such a dress seem presumptuous? Or would arriving in her everyday gray make her appear as though she didn't value Thomas's invitation? A knock at her door interrupted her deliberations. The sun still rode high in the sky too early for Thomas's wagon. Rebecca hastily closed her wardrobe and went to answer. On her doorstep stood a young woman with honey-colored hair tucked beneath a sensible bonnet. Rebecca recognized her as the milliner's assistant, though they had never spoken directly. "Mrs. Russell." "I'm Abigail Morton. Mr. Quinn asked me to bring this to you." She held out a large package wrapped in brown paper. "Thank you, Miss Morton, but I'm afraid I don't understand." The young woman smiled shyly. "Mr. Quinn said you might need something for tonight's gathering. He purchased this from our shop this morning." Rebecca accepted the package with bewilderment. "That's very unexpected." "He's an unusual man," Abigail said, then blushed at her own boldness. "Everyone's talking about how he defended you in the general store." "I imagine they are," Rebecca replied dryly. Abigail looked around nervously, then leaned closer. "Not everyone in town believes the rumors, Mrs. Russell. Some of us form our own opinions about people." Before Rebecca could respond, Abigail bobbed a quick curtsy and hurried away, leaving Rebecca staring after her with the mysterious package in her arms. Inside, Rebecca unwrapped the paper to find a dress of deep burgundy wool, fashionable but not ostentatious, with simple lines and elegant detailing that would be appropriate for a ranch gathering, while still being noticeably finer than her everyday wear. Pinned to the bodice was a note in bold handwriting. "A new beginning deserves a new dress. No obligation, only a gift freely given. TQ." Rebecca's fingers trembled as she touched the soft material. The gesture was both thoughtful and presumptuous, and yet she couldn't deny the relief she felt at having an appropriate garment for the evening. When Thomas's wagon arrived promptly at 6, Rebecca was waiting on her porch, dressed in the burgundy gown that fit her as though it had been made specifically for her measurements. Her dark hair was arranged in a simple but elegant knot at the nape of her neck, adorned with a single ivory comb that had belonged to her mother. Thomas himself drove the wagon, dressed in a clean white shirt, black vest, and dark trousers that, while not formal, showed careful attention to his appearance. His eyes widened appreciatively as he helped her up to the seat beside him. "You look beautiful, Rebecca," he said, his voice pitched low for her ears alone despite the empty street. "The dress is lovely, Thomas. You shouldn't have gone to such expense, but I thank you for your thoughtfulness." "It's my pleasure." He clicked to the horses and the wagon lurched forward. "I hope you don't find the gesture too forward. In Richmond, it would certainly be considered improper," she admitted. "But I suppose the rules are different here in Texas." Thomas's laugh rumbled between them. "The rules are what we make them, Rebecca. I've found that people who stand on ceremony often have the most to hide." The Quinn Ranch lay 5 miles outside of Llano, a sprawling property centered around a sturdy 2-story house built of limestone and timber. As they approached, Rebecca saw lanterns illuminating the wide porch and yard, where tables had been set up for the gathering. "It's larger than I expected," she commented, taking in the various outbuildings and corrals that surrounded the main house. "The Hamilton family built well," Thomas replied. "It needed some repairs when I purchased it, but the bones were solid. I've been expanding the operation slowly." "How many men do you employ?" 12 full-time hands, more during roundup and driving season. "Most of them are ex-soldiers like myself, men who needed a fresh start after the war." Rebecca glanced at him curiously. "You give many people fresh starts, it seems." His eyes met hers briefly before returning to the road. "Everyone deserves one, don't you think?" Before she could answer, they arrived at the ranch house, where several wagons and horses were already gathered. Thomas helped Rebecca down, his hands lingering slightly at her waist before he offered his arm to escort her inside. The gathering was smaller than Rebecca had feared, perhaps 20 people in total, including Thomas's ranch hands and several neighboring ranchers with their families. As they entered, conversations paused momentarily as curious eyes assessed the newcomer on their host's arm. "Everyone," Thomas announced in his carrying voice, "I'd like you to meet Mrs. Rebecca Russell, who has recently joined our community. Please make her welcome." Rebecca steeled herself for the cold shoulders and whispers she'd grown accustomed to in town, but to her surprise, several people immediately approached with genuine smiles of greeting. "Mrs. Russell, delighted to meet you," said an older woman with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes. "I'm Martha Donovan. My husband and I ranch the property adjoining Thomas's to the north." "And I'm Sarah Peterson," added a younger woman who cradled an infant in her arms. "My husband Jim is Thomas's foreman." Throughout the evening, Rebecca found herself welcomed into conversations and included in the gathering in a way she hadn't experienced since before Edward's death. If any of the guests had heard the rumors about her, they gave no indication, treating her instead with the natural courtesy of frontier people accustomed to accepting newcomers without question. Dinner was served on the long tables in the yard, simple but abundant fare of roast beef, potatoes, cornbread, and apple pies. Rebecca found herself seated between Thomas and Mr. Donovan, engaged in a lively discussion about the merits of different breeds of cattle. "What do you think, Mrs. Russell?" Mr. Donovan asked, drawing her into the conversation. "Does a Hereford bull produce better stock than a Longhorn?" Rebecca laughed softly. "I'm afraid cattle breeding wasn't part of my education in Virginia, Mr. Donovan." "But you have a good head on your shoulders," Thomas interjected. "I can tell from our conversations that you're quick to learn." "Are you planning to stay in Llano, Mrs. Russell?" Mrs. Donovan asked from across the table, The question momentarily silenced Rebecca. "I haven't decided," she admitted. "I came here hoping to find work as a teacher, but the position was filled before I arrived." "That's a shame," Mrs. Donovan replied. "We could use more educated people in this community. Perhaps something else will present itself." "Thomas mentioned you're handy with a needle," Sarah Peterson added. "I've been looking for someone to help with sewing clothes for the baby. He grows so fast I can hardly keep up." "I'd be happy to help," Rebecca offered, touched by the woman's friendly overture. As the meal progressed, Rebecca gradually relaxed, allowing herself to enjoy the companionship and conversation. When the tables were cleared and a fiddle player began a lively tune, several couples rose to dance in the open area of the yard. Thomas offered his hand to Rebecca. "Would you care to dance?" She hesitated only briefly before placing her fingers in his. "I'd be delighted, though I should warn you it's been some time since I've had the opportunity." "I'm not particularly skilled myself," he admitted as he led her to the makeshift dance floor. "We can stumble together." But as Thomas placed one hand at her waist and clasped her other hand in his, Rebecca found their movements surprisingly compatible. He led with confidence, guiding her through the simple patterns of the country dance with ease. "You're more skilled than you claimed," she observed, slightly breathless from the exertion and from the novel sensation of being held in a man's arms again after so long. "My mother insisted I learn the basics of social graces, despite my father's belief that dancing was a waste of a man's time." His eyes crinkled with the smile that was becoming familiar to her. "I'm grateful for her persistence now." The music slowed to a waltz, and Thomas drew her slightly closer, their bodies moving in harmony beneath the Texas stars. Rebecca was acutely conscious of his height and strength, of the clean scent of soap and leather that surrounded him, of the gentle but firm pressure of his hand at her back. "People are watching," she murmured, catching several speculative glances from the onlookers. "Let them," Thomas replied simply. "I'm enjoying myself too much to care. You're a very direct man, Mr. Quinn." "Life's too short for anything else, Mrs. Russell." When the dance ended, Thomas kept her hand in his as he led her away from the music toward the edge of the gathering. "Would you like to see the rest of the ranch?" he asked. Rebecca knew she should decline such a private invitation, but found herself nodding instead. "I would, yes." They walked together beyond the light of the lanterns, Thomas pointing out various features of the property: the barn where he kept his prized horses, the bunkhouse where most of his men slept, the smokehouse he'd recently constructed. Rebecca listened, asking occasional questions that revealed her quick intelligence and genuine interest. "And what's that building?" she asked, indicating a small structure set apart from the others. "That's my own project," Thomas replied, a note of pride in his voice. "Would you like to see it?" He led her to the building and opened the door, lighting a lamp that revealed a room lined with bookshelves, many already filled with volumes. A large desk occupied one corner, and comfortable chairs were arranged near a small fireplace. "My library," Thomas explained. "Most of my men can't read or write well. I'm teaching them in the evenings." Rebecca turned to him in surprise. "You're teaching them yourself?" he nodded, suddenly appearing almost shy. "My father was like yours, a teacher before he took up ranching. He believed education was the path to true freedom, especially for those who'd known bondage." Rebecca ran her fingers along the spines of several books. "This is remarkable, Thomas. Most ranchers wouldn't concern themselves with their workers' education." "I'm not most ranchers." He moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Rebecca, I want you to know that I believe your story completely. About your husband, I mean." She turned to face him, startled by the abrupt change of subject. Thank you, but why are you telling me this now? Because I've been making inquiries about Edward Blackwell's death. Rebecca stiffened. What kind of inquiries? And to whom? I have connections in Richmond, men who owed me favors from during and after the war. I asked them to look into the circumstances of your husband's death and his cousin's activities, without consulting me first. Rebecca took a step back, her earlier comfort replaced by wariness. What gave you the right to investigate my past? Thomas's expression grew serious. I apologize for not discussing it with you first, but when I saw how you were being treated in town, how that storekeeper humiliated you publicly, I wanted to help clear your name. And did these inquiries yield anything of value? She asked stiffly. They may have. My friend in Richmond writes that Marcus Blackwell has been living quite extravagantly since your departure, and that certain business associates of your late husband have mysteriously become partners with Marcus in ventures they previously refused to join. Rebecca's hand flew to her throat. You believe they were conspiring together? It's a possibility worth exploring. If Marcus arranged your husband's poisoning and then framed you for it, all while making deals with Edward's rivals, it would explain much. But we have no proof, Rebecca said, her mind racing with the implications. And even if we did, what good would it do me now? My reputation is already ruined. Thomas took her hands in his. Reputations can be restored, Rebecca, but more importantly, you deserve justice for yourself and for Edward. Rebecca studied his face in the lamplight, searching for any sign of ulterior motive or deception. She found only earnest concern and something else, a warmth in his eyes that made her heart beat faster. Why are you doing this for me, Thomas? You barely know me. His thumbs traced gentle circles on the backs of her hands. I knew from the moment I saw you in that store that you were someone special, someone who faced injustice with dignity and strength. The more I learn about you, the more certain I become. Certain of what? That you're the kind of woman I've been looking for my entire life. Rebecca's breath caught in her throat. Thomas, you can't possibly mean that. It's too soon, too unconventional, he smiled slightly. I told you I've never been one for convention, but I respect your caution, Rebecca. I'm not asking for anything from you right now, except the chance to help clear your name and the opportunity to know you better. Before she could respond, a voice called from outside. Boss, you out here? Thomas reluctantly released her hands and moved to the door. Over here, Jim. The foreman approached, his expression apologetic. Sorry to interrupt, but the Petersons are heading home and wanted to say goodbye. Several of the others are leaving too. We'll be right there, Thomas assured him, then turned back to Rebecca. Shall we rejoin the party? She nodded, still processing his words and the emotions they had stirred within her. As they walked back toward the house, Thomas offered his arm and Rebecca took it, drawing comfort from his solid presence beside her. The following weeks brought dramatic changes to Rebecca's life in Llano. Word of Thomas Quinn's obvious interest in her spread quickly through the small community, and with it came a gradual shift in how townspeople treated her. Some, like Mr. Pratt at the general store, maintained their suspicion and distance, but others began to reconsider their judgment, particularly after Thomas made it known that he had information suggesting Rebecca's innocence. The fact that such a respected newcomer, a successful rancher and businessman, believed in her caused many to question their assumptions. Thomas called on Rebecca regularly, sometimes bringing small gifts, books for her collection, fresh flowers from his housekeeper's garden, or special items from the general store that he knew she needed but might be uncomfortable purchasing herself. More importantly, he brought news. His sources in Richmond continued to investigate Marcus Blackwell's activities, piecing together evidence that supported Rebecca's account of events. Thomas shared these findings with key people in Llano, including the town's mayor and the editor of the local newspaper, gradually building support for Rebecca's cause. On a warm evening in late May, Thomas arrived at Rebecca's door with a letter in hand and excitement evident in his usually composed demeanor. "I've received word from Richmond," he announced as she invited him in. "My friend has found Edward's former valet, who was dismissed by Marcus shortly after the funeral. The man claims he witnessed Marcus adding something to Edward's medicine several times during his illness." Rebecca sank into a chair, overwhelmed by the implications. "Will he testify to this?" "He's willing to make a sworn statement. Additionally, my friend has traced several large payments from Marcus to Edward's business rivals immediately following your departure from Richmond. It appears they were indeed working together to eliminate Edward and seize control of his assets. Can this information be used to clear my name legally?" Thomas sat beside her, covering her trembling hands with his. "The authorities in Richmond have opened an investigation based on the new evidence. Marcus has already fled the city, which only reinforces suspicions against him." Tears filled Rebecca's eyes. "After all this time, I'd almost given up hope of ever being vindicated." "Never give up hope, Rebecca," Thomas said softly, reaching up to brush a tear from her cheek. "I certainly haven't." The touch of his fingers against her skin sent a tremor through her body. Over the past weeks, Rebecca had found herself increasingly drawn to this man who had championed her cause without hesitation, who had seen worth in her when others saw only suspicion. His kindness, intelligence, and quiet strength had begun to fill the empty spaces in her heart that she'd thought would remain barren forever. "Thomas," she began, uncertain how to express the emotions swirling within her, "I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done." His storm-gray eyes held her steadily. "I didn't do it for thanks, Rebecca. I know." She took a deep breath. "You did it because you're a good man who believes in justice, but it's more than that, isn't it?" A smile touched his lips. "Much more." In that moment, with the evening sunlight filtering through her curtains and the scent of spring blossoms drifting through the open window, Rebecca made a decision. She leaned forward slowly, giving him time to withdraw if she had misread his intentions. Thomas remained still, his eyes darkening as she moved closer. When her lips met his, he responded with gentle restraint, the kiss a question rather than a demand. Rebecca answered by raising her hands to his shoulders, drawing him nearer. The kiss deepened, years of loneliness dissolving in the warmth of their shared breath. Thomas's arms encircled her waist, strong but reverent, offering support rather than possession. When they finally parted, both were breathing unevenly, gazes locked in wordless communication. "I've wanted to do that since the first day in the general store," Thomas admitted, his voice husky. Rebecca smiled, feeling lighter than she had in years. "Even when you thought I might be a murderer," his laugh filled the small room. "I never thought that for a moment. I saw a woman of extraordinary courage facing down injustice with more dignity than most men could muster." "And now, what do you see now, Thomas?" His expression grew serious again. "I see the woman I want to spend my life with if she'll have me." Rebecca's heart seemed to stop, then resume at double speed. "Thomas, we've known each other barely 2 months. That's hardly enough time to know your own heart," he finished for her. "Rebecca, I'm 36 years old. I've fought in a war, driven cattle across hostile territory, built a business from nothing. In all that time, I've never met anyone who affected me the way you do." He took her hands in his. "I'm not asking for an answer today. I'm simply telling you what I know to be true for me." Rebecca studied their joined hands, his large and sun-bronzed, her smaller but equally strong in their own way. My first marriage was one of convenience and security, she said slowly. I respected Edward, but I never loved him as a wife should love a husband. I've often wondered if that was why I found it so easy to accept Marcus's accusations, because somewhere deep inside, I felt guilty for not truly loving the man I married. And now, Thomas asked softly. She raised her eyes to his. Now I understand the difference, what I feel for you. It's nothing like what I felt for Edward. It frightens me with its intensity. Good things sometimes come disguised as fear, he said, brushing his thumb across her knuckles. Take all the time you need, Rebecca. I'm not going anywhere. Before she could respond, a sharp knock at the door startled them both. Rebecca reluctantly withdrew her hands and rose to answer it. Sheriff Miller stood on her porch, his expression grave. Mrs. Russell, I need to speak with you. Is something wrong, Sheriff? She asked, anxiety immediately replacing the warmth she had felt moments before. I've received a telegram from the authorities in Richmond, Virginia. His eyes moved past her to where Thomas had also risen. Evening, Quinn. Might be good you're here for this. Rebecca stepped back to allow the sheriff inside, her mind racing with possibilities. Had Marcus been apprehended? Or had new evidence emerged to implicate her after all? Sheriff Miller removed his hat, turning it nervously in his hands. Mrs. Russell, I owe you an apology on behalf of this town. The Richmond police have confirmed that your late husband's cousin, Marcus Blackwell, has confessed to poisoning Edward Blackwell after being apprehended trying to flee to Canada. Rebecca swayed slightly, and Thomas was immediately at her side, his hand at her elbow providing steady support. He confessed, she whispered. The sheriff nodded. Apparently, when they caught up to him, he had documentation of his dealings with your husband's business rivals. He admitted to slowly poisoning Mr. Blackwell over several months, then deliberately casting suspicion on you so he could gain control of the estate. I knew it, Thomas said quietly. The evidence was all pointing in that direction. Sheriff Miller looked uncomfortable. The telegram also mentioned your involvement in reopening the investigation, Quinn. Seems you've been quite persistent in pursuing justice for Mrs. Russell. Someone needed to be, Thomas replied evenly. The sheriff cleared his throat. Well, Mrs. Russell, I wanted to deliver this news personally and to say that. Well, Llano hasn't treated you fairly. That will change now. Thank you, Sheriff, Rebecca managed, still processing the implications of Marcus's confession. After the sheriff departed, Rebecca sank back into her chair, trembling with relief and lingering shock. It's over, she murmured. After all this time, it's finally over. Thomas knelt before her, taking her hands in his. You're vindicated, Rebecca. Everyone will know the truth now. Tears flowed freely down her cheeks. I almost can't believe it. Part of me had accepted that I would always carry this shadow, always be viewed with suspicion. No more shadows, Thomas promised, wiping away her tears. Only light ahead. Rebecca looked into his eyes, seeing the future he offered, one of respect, partnership, and love based on truth rather than convenience. In that moment, her heart made its decision, though her mind cautioned patience. Thomas, she said softly, I think I need some time to absorb all of this. Would you mind terribly if we continued our conversation another day? Understanding filled his expression. Of course, you've received life-changing news tonight. He rose and collected his hat. May I call on you tomorrow? I'd be disappointed if you didn't, she replied with a small smile. At the door, he turned back to her. Rebecca, whatever you decide about us, know that I'm proud to have played a small part in bringing you justice. You deserved nothing less. After he left, Rebecca sat alone in her small house, contemplating the extraordinary turn her life had taken since Thomas Quinn wrote that single word in Mr. Pratt's ledger. Forgiven. Not because she needed forgiveness for any crime, but because Thomas had recognized the power of offering grace when the world offered only judgment. The following days brought profound changes to Rebecca's position in Llano. News of Marcus's confession spread quickly through the small community, and many who had shunned her now approached with awkward apologies and overtures of friendship. Mr. Pratt himself came to her door, hat in hand, to express his regret for his treatment of her. Rebecca accepted these gestures with dignity, neither gloating over her vindication nor harboring bitterness for past injuries. This grace only enhanced her rising reputation in the town, and soon she found herself welcomed into circles that had previously excluded her. Most significant, however, was the letter that arrived from Edward's attorney in Richmond, informing her that with Marcus's confession, the contested will had been invalidated. Edward's original testament would be honored, making Rebecca the primary beneficiary of his estate. After the necessary legal proceedings, she would receive a substantial inheritance enough to live comfortably for the rest of her life. This news brought both relief and confusion. With financial security restored, Rebecca was no longer bound to Llano by necessity. She could return to Richmond or travel anywhere she wished, building a new life without the constraints of limited resources. Yet as she considered her options, Rebecca realized that her heart no longer yearned for the society and comforts of her former life. In the weeks since Thomas had entered her world, her perspective had shifted dramatically. The values she now held dear, honesty, courage, direct speech, and genuine connection, were those she had found in abundance on the Texas frontier, and most of all in Thomas Quinn. One evening in early June, as the setting sun painted the Texas sky in vivid oranges and purples, Rebecca sat on her porch contemplating her future when the now familiar sound of Thomas's horse approached. He appeared around the corner, tall in the saddle, his silhouette outlined against the brilliant sunset. Rebecca's heart quickened at the sight of him, a reaction that had only grown stronger with each passing day. As he dismounted and secured his horse to her fence post, she rose to greet him. "Good evening, Thomas." "Rebecca." He climbed the porch steps, removing his hat as he approached. "You look lovely tonight." She smiled, gesturing to the simple blue dress she wore. "Thank you. Would you care to join me? The sunset is particularly beautiful." Thomas settled into the chair beside hers, his long legs stretched before him. For several moments, they sat in comfortable silence, watching as the colors deepened across the horizon. "I received another letter from Richmond today," Rebecca finally said. "Edward's estate has been released to me according to his original will. The attorneys have sold his business interests and converted most assets to bank drafts." Thomas turned to her, his expression carefully neutral. "That's excellent news. You must be relieved to have your financial security restored." "I am," she agreed, "though it feels somewhat hollow knowing what Edward suffered at Marcus's hands. You couldn't have prevented it, Rebecca. From what you've told me, Marcus had been planning this for years." She nodded, then took a deep breath. "The letter has me thinking about my future, Thomas, about what I want to do now that I'm truly free to choose my path." A shadow crossed his face. "And have you made any decisions?" "I've been considering all my options carefully." She turned to face him directly. "I could return to Richmond, though there's little for me there now. I could travel to San Francisco or New York, perhaps even Europe." Thomas's knuckles whitened slightly where he gripped his hat. "You deserve to see the world, Rebecca. You've been confined by circumstances for too long." "Yes, I have," she agreed, "but I've discovered something important in these past months." She reached over and placed her hand over his. Freedom isn't about location, Thomas. It's about being true to your own heart. His eyes met hers, hope beginning to replace the carefully masked concern she had seen moments before. And what is your heart telling you, Rebecca? That I've found something in Llano I never expected to find, not just justice or vindication, but a chance at real happiness. She squeezed his hand gently. With you, if you're still offering. The transformation of his expression was like watching the sun emerge from behind storm clouds, gradual at first, then blazingly bright. I believe I recently mentioned wanting to spend my life with you, he said, his voice rough with emotion. That offer stands, Rebecca. It always will. Thomas set his hat aside and moved from his chair to kneel before her, still holding her hand in his. I had a whole speech prepared for when I finally got up the courage to do this properly, he admitted with a self-deprecating smile. But finding you has taught me that the most important truths are often the simplest ones. From his pocket, he withdrew a small velvet box. Rebecca Russell, I love you. Your strength, your dignity, your compassion, and your intelligence have captured my heart completely. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? He opened the box to reveal a ring with a single perfect diamond flanked by small sapphires that caught the last rays of the setting sun. Rebecca's free hand flew to her lips as emotion overwhelmed her. Thomas. Before you answer, he continued earnestly, I want you to know that your inheritance changes nothing for me. I loved you when you had nothing but the clothes on your back and your own indomitable spirit. I'll love you the same whether you're wealthy or poor, in good times and difficult ones. Tears of joy spilled down Rebecca's cheeks as she looked at the man before her, this unexpected gift the Texas frontier had brought into her life. Yes, she said simply. Yes, Thomas Quinn, I will marry you. His smile was radiant as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to gather her into his arms. Their kiss was both a promise and a celebration, filled with the certainty of shared purpose and genuine love. When they finally parted, Thomas kept his arms around her waist, unwilling to release her completely. When? He asked, his voice husky. How soon can you be convinced to become Mrs. Quinn? Rebecca laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. Are you in a hurry, Mr. Quinn? I've waited my entire life to find you, he replied seriously. Now that I have, I don't see much point in prolonged waiting. She reached up to touch his face, marveling at how natural it felt to do so. Let's compromise then. Not so soon that people raise eyebrows, but not so long that we torture ourselves unnecessarily. 1 month, he suggested. That would give us time to make proper arrangements and for you to settle your affairs in Richmond if needed. Rebecca considered this. 1 month seems reasonable. Though I'll need to find somewhere else to live in the meantime. It wouldn't be proper to move to the ranch before the wedding. Thomas's eyes crinkled at the corners. Always concerned with propriety, he teased gently. Mrs. Donovan mentioned to me just yesterday that she has a spare room and would be delighted to have female company for a change. I think she was anticipating this development. Was our attachment so obvious to everyone? I'm afraid so, Thomas admitted, not looking remotely sorry. I've been told I look at you the way a starving man looks at a feast. The color rose in Rebecca's cheeks. Thomas, he laughed and kissed her again, briefly but tenderly. It's true, though perhaps not a comparison a gentleman should voice aloud. Forgive me. Always, she replied, the word carrying deeper meaning for both of them. As darkness fell over Llano, they remained on the porch planning their future together, a future built on truth, justice, and the kind of love Rebecca had once thought existed only in novels. The wedding of Thomas Quinn and Rebecca Russell took place exactly 1 month later on a perfect July morning at the Quinn Ranch. The ceremony was held in the shade of a massive oak tree, with wildflowers adorning simple wooden benches arranged for the guests. To Rebecca's astonishment, nearly the entire town of Llano attended, along with ranchers and farmers from miles around. Even Mr. Pratt closed his store for the occasion, arriving with a generous gift and sincere wishes for the couple's happiness. Rebecca wore a gown of ivory silk ordered from San Antonio, with lace at the collar and sleeves that had once belonged to Thomas's mother. Martha Donovan, who had become a dear friend during Rebecca's month as her house guest, had woven Texas bluebonnets into Rebecca's dark hair. Thomas waited beneath the oak tree with the circuit riding minister, looking both nervous and joyful in his new black suit. When Rebecca appeared at the end of the path that had been strewn with flower petals by the Peterson children, his face lit with such open adoration that several women in the audience dabbed at their eyes. Jim Peterson, serving as Thomas's best man, nudged him gently. "Breathe, boss," he whispered, causing a ripple of laughter among those close enough to hear. The ceremony was simple but deeply meaningful, with vows that Thomas and Rebecca had written themselves. They spoke of honesty, partnership, and the courage to believe in second chances. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Thomas's kiss was both reverent and filled with promise, drawing cheers and applause from their guests. The celebration that followed lasted well into the evening, with tables set up around the yard offering abundant food and drink. A platform had been constructed for dancing, and the same fiddler who had played at Thomas's gathering months earlier provided lively music that kept the festivities spirited. As the sun began to set, Thomas found Rebecca speaking with Mrs. Donovan and several other women from town. He approached with 2 glasses of champagne, offering one to his new wife with a smile that was for her alone. "Might I steal Mrs. Quinn away for a moment, ladies?" he asked, the name rolling off his tongue as though he'd been saying it for years. The women exchanged knowing glances and moved away, leaving the newlyweds a rare moment of privacy amid the celebration. "Mrs. Quinn," Rebecca repeated, testing the name. "It still feels strange to hear." "But good strange, I hope?" Thomas asked, leading her toward a quieter corner of the yard. "Very good," she assured him, sipping the champagne. "The day has been perfect, Thomas, more than I ever dreamed possible. It's just the beginning," he promised, "though I must admit I'm growing impatient for the guests to depart." Color rose in Rebecca's cheeks at his meaning, but she met his gaze steadily. "Patience is a virtue, Mr. Quinn." "So they say," he replied with a grin, "though I've never claimed to be particularly virtuous." Rebecca laughed, feeling both nervous and eager for the night ahead. Her first marriage had been marked by duty rather than passion, and while Thomas had been unfailingly respectful during their courtship, the heat in his eyes when they kissed promised an entirely different experience awaited her. As if reading her thoughts, Thomas's expression softened. "We have all the time in the world, Rebecca, tonight and all the nights to come." She reached up to touch his face, no longer concerned about who might be watching. "I love you, Thomas Quinn." "And I love you, Rebecca Quinn." He captured her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "More than I have words to express." They rejoined their guests for the final hours of celebration, accepting congratulations and well wishes from friends both old and new. When the last wagon had departed down the long drive, Thomas swept Rebecca into his arms to carry her across the threshold of what was now their shared home. Inside, the house had been transformed under Thomas's direction during Rebecca's month at the Donovans. New curtains hung at the windows, The furniture had been rearranged to accommodate Rebecca's few pieces from her small house in town, and fresh flowers filled vases in every room. "Welcome home, Mrs. Quinn," Thomas said softly as he set her on her feet in the entrance hall. Rebecca looked around, taking in the thoughtful changes he had made to welcome her. "It's beautiful, Thomas. When did you find time to do all this?" "I may have neglected some ranch business," he admitted with a smile, "but Jim is quite capable of managing things when I'm otherwise occupied." He led her through the house, showing her the adjustments he'd made based on preferences she had mentioned during their courtship. Bookshelves added to the sitting room for her collection. A writing desk positioned near the window with the best morning light. A rocking chair on the porch facing the sunset. When they reached the bedroom, Thomas paused, his hand on the doorknob. "I had this room completely redone," he said. "I wanted it to be ours, not a space with memories of my bachelor existence." The bedroom beyond was indeed transformed, with a new larger bed, curtains in the blue shade Rebecca favored, and a dressing table with a mirror that had been her mother's, carefully transported from her house in town. "It's perfect," she whispered, emotion tightening her throat at his thoughtfulness. Thomas stood behind her, his hands resting lightly on her shoulders. "Are you happy, Rebecca?" She turned to face him, reaching up to begin loosening his tie. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," she assured him, rising on tiptoe to press her lips to his. Their wedding night unfolded with tender patience as they discovered each other fully for the first time. Thomas's reverent touch and gentle guidance helped Rebecca overcome her initial shyness, and she found herself responding with an ardor that matched his own. In his arms, she discovered aspects of herself that had remained dormant during her first marriage: passion, playfulness, and an uninhibited joy in physical connection. Afterward, as they lay entwined in the moonlight filtering through the curtains, Thomas traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "What are you thinking?" he murmured against her hair. Rebecca smiled, nestling closer to his warmth. "I was thinking about that day in the general store when you wrote 'forgiven' in Mr. Pratt's ledger. Did you have any idea then where that simple act would lead us?" "I hoped," Thomas admitted, "though I wouldn't have dared predict this outcome." His arms tightened around her. "When I saw you standing there enduring his rudeness with such dignity, something inside me recognized you as important, essential somehow." "It was the same for me," Rebecca confessed, though I tried to deny it. After everything that had happened with Edward, I was afraid to trust my judgment about people, especially men. Thomas pressed a kiss to her temple. "And now I trust you completely," she said simply. "With my heart, my future, my life." "I'll spend every day earning that trust," he promised. As sleep began to claim them, Rebecca reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment, from accused murderess to beloved wife, from isolation to belonging, from shame to honor. The path had been difficult, marked by loss and injustice, but it had led her to Thomas and to a happiness more profound than she had ever dared to imagine. In the years that followed, the Quinn Ranch prospered under Thomas and Rebecca's joint stewardship. Rebecca's inheritance allowed them to expand their operations, purchasing additional land and improving their breeding stock with quality animals brought from back east. Thomas's innovative ranching methods, combined with Rebecca's sharp business acumen, soon made their operation one of the most successful in the county. But their greatest joy came the following spring, when Rebecca discovered she was with child. Their son, James Edward Quinn, was born in January 1880 with his father's gray eyes and his mother's dark hair. 2 years later they welcomed a daughter, Elizabeth Martha Quinn, and in 1884 their family was completed with the birth of another son, William Thomas Quinn. Rebecca found her calling not only as a mother and rancher's wife, but as an educator. The small library Thomas had built for his men expanded into a proper schoolhouse on the ranch property, where Rebecca taught not only the ranch hands, but also the children from neighboring properties. Her reputation as a teacher grew, and eventually, the school board that had once rejected her application came to ask if she would consider taking a position in town. She declined politely, preferring to remain close to her family and to maintain the independence her ranch school afforded her. However, she did accept a position on the board itself, using her influence to improve educational opportunities throughout the county. Thomas, meanwhile, became a respected voice in Texas ranching circles, advocating for fair practices and supporting smaller operations against the growing power of cattle barons. His reputation for honesty and innovation drew many to seek his advice, and he never forgot his own humble beginnings, always willing to help those who needed a fresh start. The story of how they met, of Thomas writing "Forgiven" in the ledger and championing Rebecca's cause when all others had abandoned her, became something of a legend in Llano County. Young couples were often told the tale as an example of how true love could overcome prejudice and injustice. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Thomas surprised Rebecca with a special gift, a journal bound in soft leather, its pages filled with his handwriting. "What's this?" she asked as they sat together on their porch after the children had been put to bed. "Open it," he urged, an unusual shyness in his manner. Inside, Rebecca found the story of their courtship as Thomas had experienced it, beginning with that first day in the general store and chronicling his growing love for her through those tumultuous early months. The final entry was dated their wedding day, ending with words that brought tears to her eyes. "Today, I marry the woman who taught me the true meaning of courage, not the bravery required on battlefields or cattle drives, but the quiet strength needed to face injustice with dignity and to open one's heart after it has been wounded." Rebecca Russell came into my life unexpectedly, but she will remain at its center deliberately, cherished and honored for all our days together. In writing "Forgiven" in that ledger, I never imagined I was beginning the most important chapter of my own story, one that I pray will continue for many decades to come. Rebecca closed the journal and looked up at her husband, her eyes shining with tears and love. The decade had matured him, adding silver threads to his dark hair and deepening the lines around his eyes, but his gaze still held the same warmth and steadiness that had first drawn her to him. "This is a precious gift, Thomas. Thank you for seeing the truth in me when no one else would." He took her hand, the same hand that now wore not only her wedding band, but also a mother's ring bearing the birthstones of their 3 children. "Thank you for trusting me with your heart, Rebecca. These 10 years have been the greatest blessing of my life." As the Texas sunset painted the sky in brilliant hues, Thomas and Rebecca Quinn sat together in the contentment of a love hard-won and faithfully kept. Surrounded by the legacy they had built together, a thriving ranch, 3 beautiful children, and a community that now honored rather than shunned the woman who had once been unjustly shamed. From that first bold word written in a ledger to the life they now shared, their story stood as testimony to the power of forgiveness, justice, and love to transform even the most wounded hearts into vessels of joy and blessing for all who knew them. And in Llano, Texas, when newcomers arrived with shadows in their eyes or burdens on their shoulders, they often found themselves welcomed at the Quinn Ranch, where second chances were not merely given, but celebrated, a tradition that began with a single word written by a cowboy who recognized true worth when others saw only shame.